Well, thank you very much, and it's lovely to be here this evening and to see you all. You may never have heard of Richard Wiseman, but last year Dr. Richard Wiseman discovered the secret of the greatest joke. In fact, last year Richard Wiseman actually found which joke in the world was the funniest, irrespective of the culture, irrespective of the location. And here's the joke. Two hunters are out in the forest, hunting for animals with their rifles, when suddenly one of them collapses on the ground. His eyes glaze over. His friend quickly picks up his cell phone and calls the emergency services. Help! Help! My friend has collapsed. I think he's dead. The operator says, "Sir, don't panic. Just take a deep breath. We need, first of all, to make sure that he's dead." Okay, just a moment. There's silence on the line. Next minute, a gunshot goes off, and the man comes back to the phone and says, "Okay, I'm sure now." Now, believe it or not, that's the world's funniest joke. And great. The interesting thing is, we may know more about the greatest joke than we know about what makes the greatest school. I've been privileged to be involved in schools for more than 20 years. And over the years, I've worked in schools that have catered for some of the world's most affluent families. I've worked in schools that work in situations of very tough reality. And I think I have found three things that characterize great schools, irrespective of their access to resources, irrespective of their location, irrespective of the fees they charge. Three things that characterize greatness when it comes to schools. And the first one is this. I believe that the world's greatest schools are inspired by a grand vision or a great cause. There's a lovely story that goes back to 1961 when J.F. Kennedy was the President of the United States. And he went to visit NASA to see how work was going to put the first man on the moon. And JFK had a habit of just bumping into anyone and having a chat. And there was a man standing there with a mop. It was pretty obvious what he was doing. And JFK walks up to him and says, "So tell me, what are you doing?" The man puffs up his chest and he holds his mop tightly and he says, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon, Mr. President." That man was inspired by a great cause. Viktor Frankl, the great psychiatrist who survived the horrors of the Nazi death camps as a young man, wrote a book after the war called Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, he described how people who survived the horrors and the cruelty and the deprivation weren't necessarily the fittest or the youngest, but it was those who had found a meaning in life about which they could be positive, some purpose which kept them going. Schools which are inspired by a great cause and a grand vision see beyond the individual success of students. Those great schools look to something beyond education as an end in itself. They see education as a means to an end, and that means is often the improvement of the human condition, improving the quality of life, making the world a better place. There is something deep in the human spirit which is liberated when we are inspired by a grand vision which takes us out of our selfish selves. Great schools are inspired by a grand vision, and that vision sees education not as an end, test scores, exam results, university admissions. It sees education as a means to something far greater and far nobler. That's the first thing that I have found characterizes great schools around the world: a grand cause, a great vision. Secondly, great schools have found an ability to make values visible. It was dinner time. A little boy was standing at the dining room table. Mum and Dad were trying to get him to sit down. He refused. It was getting aggressive. Mum and Dad were getting more and more frustrated, trying to get him to sit down to eat his dinner. And eventually, Mum and Dad said, "Listen, if you don't sit down right now, there'll be no Netflix tonight." The little boy sat down like that. There was a split-second silence, and then he said, "I may be sitting down on the outside, but on the inside, I'm still standing up." Schools that have learned how to make their values visible have found a way to connect what they say about themselves and their values and what actually happens on the ground. In other words, these schools do what it says on the box. Of all the values great schools learn to prize is the value of high-quality relationships. There is so much research evidence now that says when young people feel safe and secure, physically and emotionally, they learn better. When there is mutual respect in the school, when there is trust, that's when young people learn, when the values are made visible. In 2006, a young journalist called Sandy Starr wrote an article for an internet magazine called Wired, and it was the results of an incredible study. Thinkers and scientists around the world, leading thinkers and scientists, had been asked one question: what inspired you to become a scientist? And Sandy Starr published the results. You can still read them on the internet. You know what was incredible? He interviewed people ranging in age from 19 to 93, young whiz kids and Nobel Prize winners. And the most common answer to that question, what inspired you? Do you know what it was? A teacher or a mentor who took an interest in me. Some teacher who inspired me and took me aside and gave me some guidance. In other words, there was a quality in the relationship. It wasn't the science itself that sparked the interest. It was the quality of the relationship. The values were made visible. And I have discovered that great schools have this quality. They are authentic communities. What they talk about on the website and in their prospectus, you can touch it and smell it and you can feel it. Great schools are inspired by a grand cause that takes the individual out of themselves. They make their values visible. But there's a third quality that I found in schools around the world. The greatest schools whether they are in luxurious premises in the heart of a city or in a humble village setting. The greatest schools have discovered how to make learning vibrant. The word vibrant means lively or energetic. And what do I notice about these schools? I notice that they make learning challenging. The great Russian psychologist Vygotsky said that we learn most when we are in a zone, which he called the zone of proximal development. And what is that zone? It's the point at which your unaided ability to learn, you've absolutely reached the limit. And at that crucial point, a teacher, a guide, a mentor steps in and gives you a little shove, a little guidance, a little input, and it takes you over that obstacle. Vygotsky discovered that humans' learning is at its maximum when that level of challenge is there, that you've gone as far as you can, and now you need a tiny little shove to get you forward. Great schools have learned how to do that. Not to give students challenges that overwhelm them, but challenges that bring them to that unique zone. The second thing about these schools that are great and their ability to be vibrant is that they have discovered a wonderful ability, and it's the ability to be engaging, to capture the imagination of their students. One of my heroes in education was a man called Kurt Hahn, German, educator, aristocrat, survived the horrors of the trenches of the First World War, and made a promise to himself: I will spend the rest of my life in the pursuit of world peace through the cause of education. He founded the United World Colleges. He founded the Outward Bound movement, the International Award for Young People, and multiple schools. He said education must be engaging, and he made a distinction between compelling a young person, which means forcing them, and impelling them, which means allowing them to find the motivation within them. It's like this. If you want to give a hungry student a maths test, the best way to do it is to wrap the maths test around a sandwich. Then the motivation comes from within. If education is engaging, if it captures the imagination of students and they volunteer into it, they will learn more. And great schools have discovered how to do that. And then finally, vibrant learning is experiential. Great schools know that learning is not just cerebral. It's not just something that happens up here. It happens through all of our senses, hands-on learning. And that means even the environment affects us. We learn better when we're comfortable, when the temperature's right, when we've got a full belly and we've had a good night's sleep. That's experiential learning. I've been privileged to discover, wander around, and work in some great schools. They are schools inspired by a grand vision, visible values, and learning which is vibrant. The great cultural critic Neil Postman once said, "Our children are the living messages we send to a future we will not see." I hope that every child has the privilege of that message being written by the hand of a great school. Thank you very much.